مساكم الله بالخير. تست. يلا ناطرين بس دكتورة اسمة الدش. إن شاء الله صوتي زين، تسمعوني عدل. اسمع، شلونكم؟ شهر رمضان وياكم. الحين الحمد لله وصلنا 10 الأواخر. قوة حجي. عسى الصوت زين. تست. أمور طيبة. دكتورة اسماء حياك. المفروض اوكي. الحين ندش دكتورة اسماء.
يعطيكم
اهلا.
العافية.
الله يعافيك. مساك الله بالخير.
مساك الله بالنور.
It's been a while.
Yeah, I know.
It's definitely been a while.
Yeah,
Hope you've
it's been a
been
long while.
We've been trying to do this collaboration for quite a while, honestly. Like we've been trying to do a workshop this Corona.
اي
So
والله.
a quick introduction. لأن في عندنا mix ربعي وربعك.
Yeah,
I'll start with Dr. Ismail Hayim, PhD from Birmingham, lecturer in several universities in Kuwait, currently in the American College. Dr. Ismail is one of the few Arabs with a PhD in simultaneous interpreting, and one of the only Kuwaitis that I know of. She's done, mashallah, volunteer interpreting. She's done professional interpreting. I've very luckily worked with her in several workshops and other stuff. She's mentoring that I know a lot of students do, which is awesome, taking from her time to mentor students. And I'm very happy to have you here today. You're a great partner to talk about translation and interpreting, Dr.
يعطيك العافية. يعطيك العافية.
Allah يعافيك, حفظك. I hope that's a good introduction.
Yeah.
Did I miss it?
لا you didn't do anything. يعطيك العافية. It's really good to discuss interpreting and translation. لأن للأسف عندنا في الخليج بالكويت I think in particular يعني يمكن بالخليج عندنا شوي وعي أكثر عن المترجم ودورة ويعني to study translation كمهنة. عندنا بالكويت للأسف no, it's mainly in you speak two languages, يلا you can interpret, you can translate, which is not the case, unfortunately.
That is definitely not the case.
Yeah.
Yes, fluency is a part of being an interpreter, but you also need the techniques and the jargon and like أنا لليوم I can never touch a literary text or the discourse. أنا ما أصلح أترجم.
Yeah.
Political عند وجهك بس غير كذي.
Political. Yeah.
A quick introduction about myself. Abdulaziz Almaosherji. I'm a colleague of Dr. Asma in the training side. I've been a simultaneous interpreter for the National Assembly of Kuwait, for the Interparliamentary Union, for the Association of Secretaries General of Parliaments. I have a thesaurus, a specialized dictionary that's all about political jargon and political world within the scope of the GCC. I like it. It's a little book. It's interesting. And yeah, that's what we're doing so far. We have a couple of topics we'd like to discuss, and أبي صراحة أنتهز هالفرصة لأخذ من معلومات دكتورة اسمها أنه ما شاء الله تبارك الرحمن. She's a superstar in her field. فاستغلوا هالفرصة اللي عنده أسئلة يكتبها تحت. عادي نطلع برا الموضوع شوية. ونبلش. جاهزة؟
Yeah, of course. Yeah, go ahead.
تمام. First, let's address the elephant in the room, Corona, اللي مع شغلنا كله. So, what's our role as translators or the interpreters in regards of a pandemic or a crisis? So, like if we're talking about translation in a crisis management setting, is there a role for an interpreter or a translator?
I believe that we are basically first the link, second we are the mediator, and it's really important to know that us translators as well as interpreters, we can help the medicine field, I mean the medical sorry field. We can
Mm.
help people in science. We can help even the ambassadors and so on. The first
Mm-hmm.
aspect is can link the knowledge between countries. For example, when the Chinese delegate came to Kuwait,
Mm.
we needed interpreters and translators, and then
Yep.
that aside, we helped with the knowledge. When someone comes to you and they are sick, we need also an interpreter or a translator to
Mm.
actually work with them and understand how they feel, what exactly are the symptoms, especially when it's a very delicate information and it's very specific. A lot of people will not be able to actually tell you how exactly they feel. Well, they will be really lost in words of what exactly to say and what to say, and it might be taken in the wrong context. So us translators and interpreters, especially interpreters at this time, we have the major role of connecting the world together by whether our translation, like text translation, or our words when we interpret in conferences, and especially like the World Health Organization conferences. You will see people
Mm.
all from around the world with their headphones listening to interpreters. It's
Yep.
the most important vital role for interpreters now, and that's why a lot of cases now appear. It's like interpreters all over the world, because now they need interpreters, and a lot of people are, yeah, and it's very funny because a lot of people are just seeking bilinguals, and I'm
Yeah.
like, no, it's not
No.
the case. Call them natural translators or natural interpreters, and that's not the case. Not anyone who can speak two languages can go ahead and interpret or can go ahead and translate. That's not the case. They need to know the techniques. They need to know basically the way to do it, the style, the word they choose, and most importantly, they need to be aware of the jargon, because when you have a new disease, there are new terminologies, there are new
Mm-hmm.
ways to translate these words. So that interpreter or that translator, they need to be aware of those words and the terminology is basically to do it correctly. Otherwise, they will just mess the whole thing up, and instead of helping, making the situation even worse, which we know happened a lot of
It's
times.
really, yep.
Yeah.
I took it upon myself to translate some of the Ministry of Health's tweets and some of the ministers' tweets. I tried to translate into English, Spanish, French, and French. I don't know if I did Italian, which was extremely difficult because yes, I do know like the processes of those languages. I speak them to some extent,
Yeah.
but I'm not fluent in them.
Yeah.
I noticed
Yeah.
that we really need more translators and interpreters. Like, despite the English language or Arabic to English, we need other people within other disciplines or other languages in our field because I I feel like there's a shortage of translators and interpreters.
Yeah.
But a lot of us are bilingual, so I think it's worthwhile to get that education and go a step
Yeah.
further.
Yeah, yeah, because for me, I'm bilingual, and I didn't actually study translation in my bachelor degree. So I did my
Hmm.
translation in my master and PhD, and it was a new world for me, and it was a big challenge, to be honest. But I managed to do it because I'm very passionate about translation. But when it comes to translation, you cannot excel in all the fields, especially with interpreting, because
Hmm.
we know that translation, you have your laptop, you have a lot of time, but when it comes to
Yeah.
interpreting, you're right there in the moment. You have to do it. And you can't just say, oh, I'm going to think about it. I'm not quite sure, and so on. So you need to be aware of a specific type. And most of the times, interpreters, they specialize in specific fields. Like you have political interpreters,
Mm.
people who interpret
Yep.
for medical fields. Exactly.
Yeah.
People who interpret in the occasional interpretations, like legally in court, or we have them
Hmm.
in hospitals for people who do not speak the language, as simple as that. and not similarly to those who are in summits or in
Yeah.
the conferences in a huge room where they discuss medical fields, agriculture, the oil prices, economy, and then the interpreter will be like, okay, I cannot interpret, and then you lose yourself, you lose the audience, and you get fired basically. It happens a lot of times.
أول شيء النور نورك دكتور محمد العنزي ويانا. We have a ما شاء الله كوكبة من المترجمين الحين قاعد يدشون. I just like to say a quick
Okay.
hello.
That's lovely.
I do agree. Like, this is something I believe in. We can't be the know-it-all translator or the know-it-all interpreter. We have to stick to somewhat our own field. Like, we can go to similar fields, but not extremely different fields.
Yes, exactly.
I personally wasn't a translator when I first started my career. I was doing something close to what you were doing. I was teaching Kuwait University, then in Gust. It was very interesting. I genuinely enjoyed it. But when I got the opportunity to go to the National Assembly, at first, to be very honest, I didn't know what the job entailed. Yes, I was bilingual. I was fluent in English, but I didn't know the political jargon, and I thought I did. But I remember a mistake, and I do say that a lot, so probably a lot of people here know this example. لما ترجمت استجواب automatically أنا رحت investigation ولا interrogation, and I was reprimanded. No, استجواب is not interrogation, it's interpellation. I was like, استجواب يعني interrogation. يقول لي interrogation وأنت بالمخبر داخل القاعة المجلس. It's interpellation. It's a whole different thing. It's specialized, and that's the case with specialized language. It is necessary, and it is within a scope of field of a certain sector people. For politicians, we go with political jargon, and we have to go with that to separate استجواب المجلس من استجواب أو تحقيق المخبر نفسه.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's a very good point that you brought up, like the separation of specializations within translation.
Yeah, exactly. And I honestly want to take this opportunity to address the idea of terminology, the importance of terminology and jargon, and tell people, if you are interested in being a political interpreter in the Gulf area, go ahead and buy Abdulaziz's book. I mean, his مو دعاية والله. It's not دعاية. It's, because it has a lot of terminology, and sometimes sometimes because the thing is, sometimes in Kuwait we use the term, for example, مجلس الأمة. However, it's in the States, Congress. In I don't know what, in Libya it can be مجلس الشعب. So it's the same word. It means the same thing. But to the people, مجلس الأمة in Libya would be like, what do you mean? And مجلس الشعب for Kuwait will be like قصدك مجلس الأمة. So that's why we need these books. They do have detailed information. They do have detailed terminology and information for you to actually use the right word in the right context. So that's why I figured.
That's very nice of you. Thank you. On the word of Majlis al-Ummah, like I keep seeing a common mistake. احنا عندنا مجلس الأمة الكويتي الاسم الرسمي, which a lot of people translate to the National Assembly of Kuwait. And that's a common mistake. While it is a very valid translation, but the acronym is KNA. So we have to go with the standardized translation, Kuwait National Assembly, rather than the National Assembly of Kuwait. In cases like these, it's not about what we see right. It's not about our preference. We go with proper nouns. If there's a standardized translation, we definitely go with the standardized.
Exactly.
I'll take that as a segue to go towards something we're doing right now, which is a distance conferencing. I'm sorry. I think, yeah, I'll take this as a segue to go to what we're doing right now, distance
Yeah.
conferencing. So,
Yes.
what are your thoughts in regards of distance interpreting? Like, how are interpreters using these kind of technologies to practice their jobs, to do any sorts of interpreting in their own jobs or fields and whatnot?
It's really difficult, especially now, because we do have Zoom lectures
Mm.
online, we do have Instagram conferences, and even conferences like big conferences that are conducted by virtually, basically. So the
Mm-hmm.
problem with that the interpreter is not there in the room, and once the interpreter is not there in the room, we know as interpreters that we do have a problem with seeing someone far away from a distance,
Yeah.
because we rather their face so we can understand what they're talking about, and we know how to do it correctly. But now it's like you have a screen that separates you from the person, and not just that, but the idea also about how do you actually take the interpretation and send it to another person. So what we saw in a lot of Zoom lectures is that a lot of interpreters, they record the whole session and then they
Mm-hmm.
re-record it with their interpretation, which is in the other language, the target language, whether in Arabic, English, and so on and so forth, and then they dub it on the original Zoom, which basically loses a very important aspect of the conference or the lecture itself, which is the person who's speaking and their own voice and their own body language and all of that. So that's
Mm-hmm.
the thing that we face as interpreters. The second aspect is sometimes you lose a little bit of the information,
Yeah.
especially that some people now you will see them in a Zoom lecture and they're just typing their interpretation.
Yeah.
Somehow they summarize the whole context, like whatever we are doing now, they will be like, okay, Abdulaziz said this and Asma said that, and so on and so forth, which is basically summarizing as much as they can the most important information and sending it to the people, because they cannot
Mm-hmm.
afford to actually do a whole interpreting session. It's really difficult now. We do also have the other type, which is basically when you are standing at a distance in a conference, in a real conference, and you're required to
Mm-hmm.
be there, but still, since you're not in the booth and you're standing in a difference and at a distance, and you cannot hear them, it
Mm-hmm.
can be a little problematic. Yeah.
I think like one of my biggest problems when we did interpreting, whether in a different room or in a conference setting, sometimes you struggle with the intended meaning. If I'm sitting
Yes.
in front of you face to face and I know I'm getting your body language, your social cues and whatnot, I can guess the meaning even if you use an ambiguous term or a cultural
Yeah.
reference that I don't. But when we're stuck in somewhere remote or somewhere far from the ground, we start to try to guess that intended meaning rather than like in a face-to-face setting. I can even interrupt you and like, اسمع
Yeah.
إيش قصدك هني وشنو
Yes,
يقول.
exactly. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but that kind of stops when I'm doing interpreting over a phone or something a little more far from my
Yeah.
target audience or my target speaker. I remember like this was a few years ago. I was in a session in Russia, I believe, and it was horrible. Like the تنظيم هم وهذا كله, it was probably the messiest organization for an interpreter. Like the session itself and the conference went amazingly, but I don't
Yeah.
think they were expecting interpreters.
Yeah.
Our booth was, I kid you not, in a different room than the session itself. And the room that we were in had a different conference happening at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And all we had was this tiny screen where we could see the entire floor, not even zoomed into the speakers. And I get an audio feed. There was a point where the camera was on I guess, a gentleman who was nodding off, who was sleeping in the conference.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm interpreting and I'm trying not to laugh because I don't know what's going to happen in Russia.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So these problems do occur. Like I personally prefer simultaneous interpreting to consecutive, but it does come with a lot of problems.
It does.
Like
It does.
yeah, the more distance you have, the weirder it gets.
Yes, of
Especially like
course.
like with new programs like Zoom or whatnot, the delay itself can hinder the interpreting process. If I'm interpreting something you said 2 seconds ago, I could ruin the whole sentence structure.
Yeah. I was about to say that actually. Sometimes people like ask questions, and it happened actually a few days ago in a Zoom lecture, and the person asked the question, and it was lagging. So the only part of the questions that we heard was, "So what do you think?" I was like, "So I cannot just interpret ما رأيك." Because my ra'yuk in what do you think about what? So it's one of the problems that we have, especially with online. Like my internet can be excellent, but yours is bad, and then we lose the little bit of meaning. So it's very difficult. Shukran, Kuwait love. So it's really difficult, especially with the online speed of the internet, the lag. If you don't hear the questions, if you don't know who asked the question, it's very problematic, because interpreters, I know they think that interpreters just listen and that's about it, but actually for me, I listen and I just stare at the person, because I can tell like from, you know, their lips what they mean, or their eyes, and sometimes you can actually predict what they want to say. So for me, I need to stare at them. That's why I remember when we did in the workshop, I remember I was just staring, and I remember actually you came to me and you were like, "Esma, khalas," and I was like, "Okay." You just feel me in another world. It's true. Like I feel like I'm in another world. Khalas, I'm basically into that person's body. So
I get that. Like for me, the first 5 minutes is just me trying to get into the flow of translating or interpreting.
yeah.
Then I'm like an hour in, perfect translation, until I notice my voice giving out, and I bring myself out of it, because you can't talk for an hour and a half. It's exhausting.
Exactly.
And these are all things that we touch on in our workshops. Like when you and I do a workshop and what we do interpreting.
Yeah.
We like to go into these detailed techniques, like the stuff we found to be difficult, or the stuff we messed up in.
Yeah, exactly.
When I was first starting, I wished that I could have had somebody, or like met somebody, or took a lecture somewhere with a person who would have taught me these things, would have taught me the problems that an interpreter may face, well, how to use those equipments and whatnot.
We have a
yeah. Hussein, could you elaborate? I think there's a lag somewhat. What point were you actually referencing? This is a vital point, really, and it may affect our reputation. How to avoid it? I'm hoping, yeah. Asma?
I think he means, I think he means the idea of actually, like the lag, and if you can't, if I'm not mistaken, if you can't interpret, I'll have a short answer for that, if that's the question you mean, which is basically like we did in the workshops. If you do not understand what the person said, you cannot just make up things. You can never make up things. Misunderstanding, connection. Okay, so if you misunderstand something, the easy thing, if you don't understand it, basically, just skip it. You can never guess what do they mean, because if you guess, you might actually send the wrong message. And remember, as an interpreter, you're the person's voice. You're not the person. You cannot think for them. You're just their voice. So that's number one. If the internet is weak, you can simply say, "Sorry, can you say it again?" And I did that a lot of times, because I interpreted in the UK, and I interpreted for people who are not Kuwaitis. And we know that in the Arab region, we have different dialects. I have the chance to actually interpret for Libyans and Syrians, and Syrians are really like easy to the tone of like to the ears, and I understood them. But when it comes to Libyans, sometimes it's really difficult, and you do not understand what they mean. So you have to actually say, "I'm sorry, is this what you really mean?" do you mean this and this and that? So you can understand the meaning and then reinterpret it. But that's again in a different context, in a context where you are interpreting for individuals, for personal affairs, rather than in a conference. In a conference, most of the time, the language used is very academic, very professional. So it will be very unlikely that you don't understand the meaning. And if you do, you just need to skip it, because you cannot say something that you're not sure of. Otherwise, you will say something that the person did not say, and that's one of the most important mistakes that a lot of interpreters fall in, and it's just frowned upon.
I'll add to what Dr. Asma is saying. When you take a workshop with Dr. Asma, she will give you, like, one of the days is theories and techniques of interpreting. And we discuss maybe 5 or 6 theories, 5 or 6 techniques where you can basically summarize, reword, delete. There are many different ways to deal with it, but by and large, what I would do, I would literally, if you wouldn't mind repeating what you said, rather than, yeah, that's the most appropriate way, I personally believe. And went back in my National Assembly days, I used to be the guy who's usually بس ولكن ممكن زين, if Your Excellency, if would you mind, you meant this and that, or did you mean this and that? Could you repeat those numbers? May I get those statistics? You improve your interpreting skills by interpreting.
Yes.
Like, there's no running away from that. The way you improve is you just practice at home. I used to watch TED Talks and interpret for TED Talks.
CNN. BBC.
CNN. I know a friend of mine interprets for Gaddafi. So that's the way. It's basically you go with the field that you're in, whether you want. Let's say you're into politics. I usually go with something more political, and I get 2 folds of the benefits. I get the interpreting practice, and I get the jargon, and that's hitting 2 birds with 1 stone. And also, don't forget your public speaking skills.
Yes, yes.
If you have a fear of public speaking, you're going to have a tough time interpreting.
Yeah, you can never be.
You have to have both. Like I always say, and I say this a lot in the account, to be a successful interpreter, you need to be a very good public speaker. You need to have 2 languages at least, and you need to have jargon. You don't need to have every jargon in the entire world, but you do have to have jargon for your desired fields. Recording yourselves is an amazing way to practice, although I personally hate the sound of my voice. I can't hear myself. Like I can watch myself, but I can't hear myself. It's too painful for me. If you can do that, all the best. That's a great way to do it.
If I can tell you something and advice, it's basically 2 things. Always practice and always listen. When I say listen, because us interpreters, it's very difficult for us. We basically take the information and we understand it, and then we re-say it in a different language. So a lot of translators, sorry, not translators, a lot of interpreters, they cannot actually listen very well. Their listening skills is rather less than their speaking skills. So they can be very good at speaking in public speaking, but when it comes down to listening, they're very bad at listening. You will see them saying, what شنو ما فهمت مرة ثانية. And then if you're like that, you're going to be a bad interpreter. That's it. Because as an interpreter, you need to develop your listening skills. So once you listen to something, you understand it right away. You can actually reinterpret it in another language or re-say it in a different language. And then your ability to actually anticipate what the speaker says. For example, if they're talking about the sky is blue, and then you can say the sky is blue and the weather is nice. So you anticipate what the speaker is going to say. And it happens a lot of times. Like you will see the interpreter even saying things that before the actual speaker, because they can actually anticipate, especially if they know the speaker. Like if you interpret for that person for more than 1 time, then you actually know their language and their linguistic skills and their style as well. So listen, always listen, and try to just practice at home, because when it comes down to interpreting, my first interpreting disaster, I always say that in the workshops, all the people who joined us in the workshop knows, Abdulaziz knows, I interpreted El Fayadan into flooddat because it was in English, and I was interpreting, and I said هنالك العديد من الفلدات, and I didn't even know that I did, because once you're in that stress and in that concentration, you really don't know your mistakes. But once I left, my friends were like, الفلدات. I was like, oh. So sometimes you do say things. That's why I as well don't like to listen to myself, because I know in bid'ah, and I hate the tune of my voice as well. I do not like to hear it. Like, even when my mom listens to something I said right next to me, I'll be like, can you just shut that down? I don't want to listen to myself. So it's one of the things that a lot of people, interpreters in specific, don't like to hear the tone of their voice. But once you want something, you can always do it. Of course, if you want to be an interpreter.
I'll add to that, Dictora. When you said you can start to anticipate,
Yeah.
one of my favorite people to interpret to, rather, is Dr. Abdulkarim al-Kindiri, and don't know if he's watching this. هو المريح فيه إنه he always uses formal language. He's short and concise, and he uses proper collocations. And when you use proper collocations, you can anticipate at least 2 words in. When let's say if I'm saying it's raining, you can usually anticipate cats and dogs. So there are certain things within the scope of your certain fields that you can start to anticipate. And Dr. Abdulkarim used to give us room. He knew protocol, and I love people who know protocol. Like, that's so comfortable. And he uses concise language. I've seen horror stories while interpreting, whether in Kuwait or outside of Kuwait. Like, I usually say, like, whenever I have a class, whether we have a workshop together, a lot of people are very tough on Kuwait. Like, they think our people don't know protocol. But I've seen horror stories all over the world. I've seen people, there was a case, and I kid you not, Dr. Asma probably knows the story, where I was sitting there casually interpreting, doing what I do. And the guy I was interpreting to, like one of the guys, just said, okay, our meeting is done. Could you tell him whatever so he can leave? And I'm like, yeah, no. He was like, yeah, just tell him that the meeting's over, do whatever you have to do, and just tell him we have to go. And I'm like, I apologize, Your Excellency. If you would like to relay a message, you relay it. I, as an interpreter, I never add any extra information, or I never say any extra information. I won't put my words in your mouth. So whatever you have to say, you have to say. And there are a lot of horror stories.
Yeah, I agree. شكرا أحمد ومريم, يعطيكم العافية, cousins.
I'll relay this. Like, we talked a lot about jargon, and we talked a lot about new words. So let's discuss new jargon.
Yeah. I actually have a list.
Wow.
But I'm not gonna. No, I don't have a list, but it's because the thing is, once we started this Corona thing, I started writing a paper, and the paper is basically about how do interpreters actually come up with new terms. Because when you see that there are new words in the language, especially in Arabic, it's because interpreters created these words. And most of the time, interpreters try to come up with words that are not the same as the word that we have in English, for one reason, because they always assume that because the word is in English, it has to have a translation in Arabic. And if it's one word, we have to have one word for it as an equivalence in the other language, which is totally wrong. Because a very simple example that I saw yesterday, and I was talking about in Twitter, is the term call for papers. Call for papers, basically for conferences, presentations, and so on and so forth. And it was translated in Arabic into iktitab or istiktab. And I don't know. I don't understand who came up with that term. It's simple. It's simply because sometimes people think, okay, you know what, let me just create a new term. And that's not right. The new term has to be approved upon by the whole Arab society, because back again, you're talking about Arabic, and then you are actually speaking in behalf of all the country. So we need you, or the whole Arab region. So we need to have a term that is approved, that is agreed upon, and that makes sense and can be explained and actually tell you the meaning right away. So we have another one which is related to corona, and it's infodemic, which was translated into al-waba al-ma'lumati. And we also have, hi Ghadir, شلونك? And we also have COVID idiot, which is basically those two terms are related to. I know that infodemic is not related to corona, it was there before, but we don't have an equivalence for it in Arabic yet. The problem with these terms is that it's in English, and in English we can actually add two words together and create
compound
a word for it. Yes, exactly. But in Arabic we cannot do that. So what people tend to do is just translate it the way they are. So we have غبي COVID, and we have الوباء المعلوماتي. I'm totally against الوباء المعلوماتي because I feel it's rather vague. So I would like to just simply, for me, my best approach is we can just simply explain the word. Like when it comes down to infodemic, we can simply say انتشار المعلومات الخاطئة, انتشار الشائعات. This basically, these two words, they would make sense. People will understand them, and that's the better option that we have, instead of coming up with a word like people are not going to understand and will think it's very weird. And that's basically my opinion. But then again, a lot of interpreters or translators choose to actually find an equivalence, whether it's nice, it's horrible, it's vague. We need to have an equivalence in Arabic, and we need to use it. But it's again, it's to whatever you actually like to use as a person. And for me, I always like to explain, especially when it's a word that is not really nice and very vague.
In regards of why am I getting a weird? Yeah, okay, we're getting question. It's quite a long question. First of all, let me read it out loud and we can answer it. One of the translation professors told us that if we didn't know what a new word translation is, to research it on Google and pick the translation that has the most results. Is this a good way to do it? Personally, I believe we have to go with whatever is standardized first.
Yeah.
So first I go to the dictionaries. We find the standardized term and we go with that translation. The second, your second filter is to go with whatever is standardized in the media if you don't find the first filter. So if it's not standardized in dictionaries, you go to what's standardized in the media. If nothing's standardized in the media, you can either choose whatever you find or you can coin. Because whatever is in currency and your coinage are no less equivalent than each other, as long as it's not standardized there.
Yeah.
I believe
and
we have
before I go to the other question, we also have translation forums. We have pros, which is basically for translators. You only have translators there with 2 languages or 3 languages, and they try to come up with the best translation that they all approve upon, because we have a term, and then all the translators speaking those 2 languages, they would suggest the terms, and the other translators will actually vote for the best translation. So this is actually one of the best forums that you can always go to, because you can see the translation. Because sometimes people come up with words and then they all agree on it, but it's not standardized in the media. You will see media saying different things, because it happened now. We have a lot of people, newspapers and TV, they say وباء كورونا المستجد. Some of them just simply say COVID. Some of them say وباء corona, and some of them they say actually وباء I don't know what, taji. So a lot of people use whatever they feel is best for them. We can go to the if you like.
I actually, just to add, I had a question yesterday about, it was a small consultation in regards of having COVID written in Arabic, and that was for a government website, and I personally believe the standardized translation for COVID-19 is وباء كورونا المستجد.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it is sort of standardized when we talk about the government scope, and we usually have to have our own filters.
Exactly.
Thank you. I like these paintings too, Hadir. In regards, we have another question about idioms. Can we skip idioms if we don't understand them? What do you think, Dictora?
Of course you can. Then again, when it comes to interpreting, you will never be able. I will tell you one thing. If you think you will be able to actually interpret the whole thing that people say or the person you are interpreting to said, you will be a bad interpreter because you will never be able to do it. As an interpreter, you sometimes summarize, you sometimes skip. Sometimes you just feel like the people talking, they're so fast and you just skip to the meaning and you don't say whatever. And usually, most of the time, idioms are there to make the language better, basically a linguistic beauty. So you don't really need it if you are interpreting the meaning, because people who are listening, they need to understand the meaning, not that, the beauty of it, because this is, again, not translation, it's an interpreting. So that's basically what I think.
I usually, like when we're interpreting, especially, we don't get a lot of idioms.
Yeah.
Like it's mostly formal language. When we do get idioms, if we know them, we'll translate. We'll give the proper interpreting for that idiom. We'll give the proper translation. If not, I just try to summarize and get as close to the meaning as possible. But if your question is about translation and you're like doing a text that's idiomatic, you cannot skip those idioms because you have time and your translation. The quality of a good translator or interpreter is giving natural sounding discourse. And an interpreter can get away with a little roboticness, but a translator can't. A translator has to provide a very natural text because you do have time. What we do is more instantaneous. There, in regards of jargon, going back to jargon, I have an idea or I have a theory. I just want to discuss it with you, Dictora.
Yeah.
The current scheme or the current jargon that we're seeing out there, I have this theory that I'd like to research. I think it's not new jargon, to be honest. Like we have compounds, but a lot of the things we are currently seeing, whether that's Corona or COVID or whatever, face shields, I think you mentioned before we started this, they're all medical jargon that have now become media jargon. They were very specific to a field that have now become into social currency and social status. They've now become something that everybody's talking about.
Exactly.
And that metamorphosis to language, having something being so specific, so medical, something that most of us don't know. And suddenly, because of this pandemic, everybody now knows that language. So we can actually see that language is becoming more of a living thing. Language is becoming something that changes day after day. What's something specialized one day is now in social currency. So how do we remedy that? How can we tell everybody that virus corona al-mustajid is the proper way to translate COVID-19? How do we relay that information?
I think we can, as translators, we can never do that, because the thing is, it goes again back to the agency that you're working for. So if the people I'm working for chooses to write Corona instead of COVID al-mustajid or whatever, they will choose that whether I like it or not, which is back again to the terms that certain news agencies use, and also what the translators and what the interpreters chooses. Because like we said a while ago, personally, I choose to actually come up with a translation that is mostly understandable rather than a term that has no meaning. So we can never really standardize unless it's look at simply as the word al-hasb al-ali. You have many 10% of the Arab region using al-Hasib al-Ali, although it's standardized. When you Google it, like when you search in dictionaries for the word computer, you will see al-Hasib al-Ali. However, all of today we use in the written language, in newspapers, in academia, we say computer. We don't. It's very rare that we say al-Hasib al-Ali. It comes again back to who is writing, their preference. Some people are really proud of their language. I'm personally very proud of my language, but still, I feel like there is no need to sophisticate a language and make it really hard for the listener. So I choose the simple way to do it, which is either explain or simply.
I like your points. So we sort of become like authors ourselves. We become different translators with different styles. And if an author wants a certain person's style, I would go to Dr. Esma, and I would go to Abdulaziz, because they have different styles, because they bring different things to the table.
They do.
That's quite interesting. Like there is no standardization to language, because different linguists or different translators choose different methods to translate their different texts, and I find that notion very interesting. So language itself can evolve in a manner where computer, even though it used to be transliterated, is now standardized Arabic.
Exactly.
What do you think about the common misspells of words? Like I get a lot of questions in regards, if I have a text with multiple spellings of the same text has American spellings and British spellings. Like, you as an educator, do you frown upon these things, or is that okay?
That kills me. That kills me, because currently I'm also an editor for a journal in New York, and it kills me to see a text that is English, like American English and British English, because one of the things that it's 101, English 101 in college. If you want to write in one language. And when I say language, I mean it, because color is written differently, analyze is written differently, behavior, all these words. So when you write between two languages, or two British English and then American English, you're just making mistakes. And I can actually circle it and be like spelling mistake. And that's what I do. I honestly do it, and I'm very harsh when it comes down to this, because if you want to write something, an article, a paper, or even a translator, like if you want to translate a text, you need to be consistent. And consistency is one of the most important things when it comes down to any written text. Because even words like corona, like let's say we say al-waba al-mustajid, and then we say corona, and then we say COVID-19. People will be like, are they three different things? Or do you mean one thing? So you will be confusing the person who's reading. Hi, Zainab, Shonaj. Exactly. The message is to just simply send the message in a simplified way for the listeners when it comes to interpreting. But when it comes to translators, no, you cannot mess with the message. You have to do it exactly the same, but in another language.
Yeah. I used to, like, back in my teaching days, one of the things that would kill me is when I get a report that has MLA and APA styles together. Like, even in my translation days, we have certain forms for different things. Like, if you want to send a letter to a world leader, it's written so. If you want to send a letter to an MP, it's written in a different manner. And when I get letters that are just jumbled up, or just like words on a page, it's horrible. You can't use this sort of language in a matter for, or let's say in a session or a theme for a king or royalty or whatever. I remember I translated a letter to Queen Elizabeth, and it was one of the scariest things I've ever translated, because first of all, it was a secret document.
Yeah.
It's declassified now, so I can talk about it. But back then, I can't talk about anything in that document unless it goes out.
Yeah.
So I was very secretive about it, and like I was hiding it. And second, it was full of different titles and names, and the British titles are just horrible. I'm not.
Yeah.
I don't know the Duke of whatever and the Crown Prince of that and the I found those very confusing, but I have to
Yes.
translate them in a certain manner. And
Mm.
then it's the stylistics of the document itself. I'm a translator. I'm not a researcher or a diplomat. So yes, you as the original author, you know how to write an official document to a queen in
Yeah.
Arabic. But how do I write it in English? What are they expecting? Because you're
Exactly.
following local Kuwaiti protocol. I have to follow British protocol.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
How do I do that?
That's one
And
of the most important things, actually. It's a disaster sometimes.
so the first couple of times I just translated it as is. I did the proper language. I did my research in regards of the terms and the titles. But then I had to study protocol. I had to study British protocol just so I know how to write an official document to the royal family.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's our job is not as easy as people think. It's not just regurgitating words or whatever into a different language. It's a lot of research, and people don't appreciate that research. Don't appreciate that extra work. It's a lot more than opening Google Translate somewhere and copying and pasting something here and there. Everybody can do that. You, as a translator, you can do that, but you'd be a horrible translator. Nobody would want to work with you.
Exactly. Yeah.
I
Agreed.
I want to work with a translator that would give me a document that reads as original as possible.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot more effort than people give justice to.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. 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 It's not just word for word translation. It's also knowing the culture that you're translating into, because you don't want to offend that culture.
That's a great point, actually. Like being culturally aware, being culturally fluent, let's say. Like
Yeah.
you have to know different cultures and how to address different cultures.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Again, with the Brits, like I remember getting a visit by British lords to the country, and I was their liaison and interpreter. During the session, they were the most formal and the most intense people you'll ever meet. That I had to sit up and proper, and I was very, yes, no, sir. The moment our meetings ended, like we went out to dinner and whatnot, they were the funniest bunch in the world. We were
Yeah.
literally fighting over football, and I'm a United fan, so they did not like me.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll segue this to new slang. Like you mentioned I think a couple new compounds like covidiot
Yeah.
and those
Infodemic.
infodemic used to be a mass communication term, and I love that it's now more into currency. I believe you have a question, Victoria?
Where can a person apply to be a translator? You mean, Ghadir, to study translation and be a certified translator, or you want to work as a translator? Okay, I'll answer both. If you want to study translation, most of the translation degrees is in the UK. We have the Birmingham University, we have Salford University, Manchester University, and Leeds University. If you can take a master degree in translation, and will be very much in depth studies, thorough and everything. You will learn translation theories, and you will practice interpreting and translation if you want to do interpreting or just translation. And if you want to work as a translator, we do have jobs in Kuwait to apply for that, but unfortunately, we do not have freelance translators in Kuwait. I think we do. Abdulaziz said that we do have one or two, but the ministries are familiar with them, so they will only call them. They will not just hire you, unfortunately. Um, I don't know how it works, to be honest, in Kuwait, but in the UK, you are assigned, you're a freelance translator like I was. I was assigned to different agencies. They have my number. They would call me and say, there is a job. Do you want to take it? And then you go ahead and do it. But in Kuwait, freelancing is not really a big thing. So you can work in specific ministries. I think Dar al-Istithmar, the Gulf Bank want I don't want to do دعايات ما أدري عادي ولا لا بس they do have actually a lot of people are advertising that they need translators. 2-3 banks actually wants translators now at the moment, and it's just a bachelor degree with majoring in translation. So once you have your master, you will be qualified right away. We have another question.
I think it was a statement. We have many translators disregard the cultural aspect of a text and it only makes their translation so horrible. I agree.
Like, too.
Knowing the culture you're translating to is extremely important, and knowing the jargon or the technical terms, even the phrasings they do, is what makes your text sound natural to the culture you're translating to. For the new slang, I'd like to add the social media slang that we're seeing. Like, I'm noticing my nephew sitting a lot. Like, since we're in quarantine, I'm usually the babysitter now. He's using stuff like hayil, damage. He's playing video games, and hayil is healing, I learned, and damage is doing damage to.
Oh my God.
Yep. They're doing these. I wouldn't even call them transliterate. I think they're doing something closer to your fladdat, دكتورة. They don't know the Arabic equivalent, بس قاعد يعربونها غصب, and we're getting stuff like يهيل, يدمج, whatever. So Rome, I'm hearing stuff like that.
Yeah.
We're getting this sense of a mixed language between Arabic and English, and I'm at a point where I don't understand what my nieces and nephews say anymore. Abdulaziz, does translation make a good living? Translation and I'd say interpreting makes a good living, a lot more than translation, because interpreters are rarer than translators. We have more translators and interpreters as career people in the country. Like every government institute I've ever been in has a department for translators, even though we can argue how trained they are as translators. But as fully fledged interpreters, I haven't met much. I know of 3 others, maybe 4, other than Dr. Ashman and myself. So it is a rarity of it, and I guess it falls with the supply and demand. The less of a thing there is, the more of a demand there is for it, and the more they're willing to pay for it. But there's a lot of the interpreting jobs do pay very well. Even if you get to the UN, if you become a UN interpreter, I think that pays $1,000 a night, which is not bad. 300 dinar a night and fully paid for hotel room and amenities and whatever. So it can be the lucrative job, although don't underestimate the pressure and the mental strain that it will get you.
Yeah.
I would also like to move to the importance of translation interpreting in combating misinformation and disinformation. So just for the people, I'll explain these 2 definitions real quick. Misinformation is the unintentional spreading of false information, and disinformation is the intentional spreading of false information. And we're seeing the local government now cracking down on accounts and different individuals who are trying to spread falsified information regarding the current pandemic we're facing. So, Dictora, what do you think, or how do you think translated, I think we're going to have to end in 22 seconds. Let's end and come back again. What do you think? We talk a lot.
Okay. Do you want to end it and then we can answer the question?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, yeah.